As the new kingdom reached the height of its power, the traditions of Israel were beginning to take shape in the lands beyond Egypt's frontiers. The great campaigns of pharaohs and the remembered journeys of prophets would become separate streams of history, one recorded in stone, the other carried through scripture. And after Moses, leadership passed to Joshua. The prophet of passage was gone. The tradition says the Israelites crossed the Jordan River and entered the land of Canaan, not as wandering tribes of the wilderness, but as a people carrying covenant, law, and memory. And after the conquest traditions, after the first settlements in Canaan, there was no unified kingdom, no throne, no capital, no empire. Instead, this became the age remembered as the period of the Judges. The Israelites now lived among older Canaanite populations, surrounded by fortified cities, sacred high places, agricultural cults, and ancient regional deities. And so, from the instability of the Judges, a new desire emerged among the tribes, the desire for a king. And so the first king arose, Saul. And from within Saul's court, another figure emerged, David, a shepherd, warrior, and eventually king. He united tribes once divided, and most importantly, he captured Jerusalem. And under David, the Israelites were no longer remembered merely as tribes emerging from the wilderness. They became a kingdom. Then came Solomon, not merely a king, but a figure suspended between history, memory, wisdom, and legend. Under Solomon, it is said that the transformation reached its height. The kingdom expanded, trade flourished, monumental construction began, and at Jerusalem, the first temple was built, a permanent sanctuary for the God of Israel. Yet here, the story enters one of the great debates of ancient history. For unlike the temples of Egypt, Assyria, or Babylon, no confirmed remains of Solomon's temple have ever been identified. Not a single stone can be definitively linked to the structure described in the biblical tradition. No surviving inscription names its builders. No contemporary royal records describe its construction. The temple survives primarily through later texts, memory, and religious tradition. For believers, its significance remains immeasurable. Centuries after Solomon, the first temple was gone. Jerusalem had fallen. The kingdom had been conquered, and many of its people had been carried into exile in Babylon. Yet the story did not end there. When Persian rule replaced Babylonian rule in the 6th century BCE, a new chapter began. Exiles returned, the city was rebuilt, and upon the sacred mount, a new sanctuary arose, the Second Temple. Unlike the temple attributed to Solomon, the Second Temple stands upon firmer historical ground. Its existence is attested not only in Jewish tradition, but also in Persian, Greek, and Roman historical sources. It was expanded dramatically under Herod the Great, transforming the Temple Mount into one of the largest sacred complexes of the ancient world. Pilgrims traveled from across the region. Priests conducted daily rituals. Sacrifices filled the courtyards. And Jerusalem once again became the spiritual center of Jewish life. Yet even here, history leaves us with paradox, for the temple itself no longer stands. In 70 CE, during the First Jewish-Roman War, Roman legions under Titus besieged Jerusalem and destroyed the sanctuary. The great courts vanished. The altars disappeared. The priesthood ceased. And today, only portions of the retaining walls of the Temple Mount remain. The structure that once dominated Jerusalem survives largely through ancient descriptions, archaeology, coins, inscriptions, and memory. Unlike the First Temple, whose existence remains debated in its details, the Second Temple is firmly established in history. Yet, like the First Temple, its physical grandeur has been lost to time. After Solomon, the story becomes far less certain. The grand united kingdom described in later biblical tradition is said to have fractured, dividing into the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. Rehoboam, identified as Solomon's successor, ruled Judah from Jerusalem, while rival rulers emerged in the north. At the same time, other traditions began to emerge. Among the most influential was the Kebra Nagast, a medieval Ethiopian text compiled many centuries after the age of Solomon. It tells the story of the Queen of Sheba's visit to Jerusalem and claims that she bore Solomon a son named Menelik, who would become the founder of Ethiopia's royal dynasty. Through this account, Ethiopia's kings traced their lineage to Solomon, creating one of the most enduring royal traditions in African history. Yet the text was written long after the events it describes, placing it firmly in the realm where history, memory, and national identity intersect. What remains clear is that the period following Solomon was not one of unity, but of division. Kingdoms competed, memories evolved, and stories were reshaped by later generations. And as the historical evidence grows thinner, the line between documented history and sacred tradition becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish. Before the kingdoms of Israel and Judah stood divided, before Solomon's temple and David's throne, the land was a patchwork of tribes struggling for survival. Along the coastal plains, the Philistines held military power, armed with iron weapons and fortified cities. It was in this age that the stories place Samson, remembered as a judge, warrior, and folk hero, whose battles reflected the long conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines. But Samson did not build a kingdom. Neither did the judges who came before him. For generations, the tribes remained decentralized, united only by tradition, kinship, and occasional leaders who emerged in times of crisis. Only later would this fragmented landscape give rise to Saul, then David, and eventually Solomon. Under them, the tribes would be gathered into a single monarchy. Yet that unity proved temporary. After Solomon's death, the kingdom fractured once more, dividing into Israel in the north and Judah in the south, setting the stage for the turbulent centuries that followed. But while the kingdoms of Israel and Judah struggled with division, succession, and survival, another story had unfolded centuries earlier along the Nile. A story not of a kingdom breaking apart, but of a civilization at the height of its power. For Egypt's empire still stretched across foreign lands. Its temples stood filled with wealth. Its priesthood commanded immense influence, and the old gods of Kemet remained at the center of public life. Yet from within the royal house itself, a challenge was about to emerge. A king, born Amenhotep IV, who would become Akhenaten and challenge the old order itself, the king who challenged the gods of Kemet. He looked upon the priests of Amun, who controlled enormous wealth and power, and he abolished them. In their place, he declared there was only one true divine force, the Aten, the radiant, life-giving sun disk. This was not merely a reform of worship. It was one of the earliest clearly documented experiments in monotheism the world had ever seen. A radical attempt to replace the many with the one. And in that vision, he may have left an echo far beyond Egypt. The great hymn to the Aten carries themes that later readers have long recognized in sacred texts, like Psalm 104, the sun as giver of life, creation awakening at dawn, all beings sustained by divine order. He moved the capital from Waset, Thebes, to a new city in the desert, Akhetaten, now called Amarna, and there he became consumed by spirituality. So consumed that while he built a new heaven on earth, Egypt's military power weakened. The empire's frontiers came under pressure, and the Amarna letters revealed desperate appeals for aid that often never came. Even the art changed. Gone were the timeless, perfect royal forms. In their place came emotion, intimacy, a king kissing Nefertiti and holding his daughters beneath the rays of the Aten. But Akhenaten's significance lies in both vision and failure, because after his death, his city was abandoned, his statues smashed, his name erased. Later rulers of Kemet saw him as a dangerous deviation from divine order and tried to bury him from history for more than 1,000 years. And yet, his questions remained. Can truth come from one source? Can peace come from one divine order? Can humanity live beneath one light? Had later seekers of peace, from Gandhi to Martin Luther King Jr., looked more deeply into Kemet, they may have found that some of those questions had already been asked beneath the Egyptian sun. Around 1500 BCE, the world was not silent. It was alive with multiple centers of organized human intelligence. Different civilizations were not trying to become the same thing. Each one mastered a different dimension of reality. Some mastered stone, others mastered numbers, others mastered metal, war, trade, or spiritual order. And among them all, one civilization stood as perhaps the most complete expression of integrated human knowledge. In the Nile Valley, ancient Egypt achieved something extraordinary. It did not simply develop knowledge, it integrated it. Spirituality, kingship, medicine, architecture, agriculture, and writing were fused into one living system. Temples aligned with the heavens, stone was shaped into eternity, and the state itself reflected divine order. Egypt's genius was not just intelligence, it was coherence. In Mesopotamia, intelligence took another form. Here, the world was organized through writing, numbers, and law. Reality was measured. Contracts were recorded. Stars were tracked. Kings ruled through systems of administration and scribal precision. In the East, under the Shang dynasty, civilization was shaped through ritual and bronze. Bronze was not merely a metal. It was power made visible. Kings ruled through ancestral legitimacy, divination, and ceremonial authority. This was a civilization of lineage, metallurgy, and sacred kingship. In Anatolia, the Hittites organized intelligence around power, law, and strategic survival. This was one of the great military civilizations of the Bronze Age. They mastered chariot warfare, fortified political control, and imperial diplomacy. But the Hittites were not only warriors. They were also highly sophisticated in state administration, legal organization, record-keeping, and the management of a diverse empire across difficult terrain. Across the sea, the Minoans and Mycenaeans built a different world. Their intelligence flowed through palaces, trade, storage systems, and maritime exchange. Ships connected distant shores. Goods moved through controlled networks, and elite life was shaped through art, ceremony, and administration. This was intelligence shaped by the sea, maritime, economic, and aesthetic. In South Asia, the great urban systems of the Indus had already faded, but their civilizational logic remained. This was a world that had already mastered planning, standardization, craft precision, and regulated urban life. Even in transition, its inheritance reflected a high form of ordered human organization. India was already inhabited, organized, and culturally developed long before the Aryans entered the subcontinent. The Aryans invaded India from the northwest. Though they may not have arrived in overwhelming numbers all at once, they came as warrior elites, pastoral clans, and aggressive incoming groups who gradually imposed themselves over northern India. This was a major invasion, and transformation period. During this time, Aryan-speaking groups spread across much of northern India, while the older Dravidian populations remained and mixed with them. Local indigenous peoples were also absorbed into the expanding social order, and Vedic culture spread widely across the north. As this process unfolded, North India became more Indo-Aryan in language, religion, and elite culture, while South India remained more strongly Dravidian-speaking in language and identity, and many tribal and indigenous communities spread throughout forests, hills, and frontier regions. Even so, both regions were already mixed biologically and culturally through long interaction and shared ancestry. By this stage, the major population structure of India was largely in place. Regional kingdoms gradually blended all of these populations together over time. Across the ocean, in Mesoamerica, another intelligence was beginning to emerge. The early world that would later give rise to the Olmec was starting to organize itself around ceremony, sacred authority, and symbolic power. Earth was shaped into ritual centers. Society was beginning to gather around the visual language of the sacred. This was the early rise of ceremonial civilization in the Americas, and later, in West Africa, the Nok culture would reveal another path. They shaped human form in terracotta and worked with early iron. Without vast written archives or monumental stone temples, they expressed intelligence through craftsmanship, symbolism, and material transformation. Together, they reveal something profound. Human civilization did not rise in only one form. It rose in many forms, each one a different expression of humanity's greatest power, the ability to organize thought into lasting reality.